Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and I'm joined by one awesome co-host this week, Laura Nash. How are you doing, Laura?
I'm doing great with a very low battery, thanks to all three of these beautiful and draining games.
Yeah, mine too, actually. I've been having a lot more problems with that lately. Even though I've got the gigantic iPhone 7 Plus, which usually under normal circumstances, no problem. But let me tell you, you release another Alto game, and it will murder my battery every day until I max out all of the achievements. Real problem.
It's a problem that I'm also suffering through, but that's okay. Like, if we get a sequel to one of the prettiest games we've ever played, I will be okay with it. And
yeah.
We've already kind of spoiled this, but we are talking about iOS sequels this week because Alto's Odyssey has been out for about a week now.
Yeah.
And Raygan got to play the closed beta because
just for a little bit.
Special.
Just for a few days. And yet you're still beating my score. I am so mad.
I am thunderously beating your score. Thank you very much. Despite having a lot less time to work on this. So.
This will not stand. I will not have it. So this week is going to be a little bit of an unusual episode for us, in part because we're recording in a bit of a rush. Laura is about to leave on her honeymoon.
Woo!
Yeah, and I'm also going on a quick trip. So we're recording in a little bit of a rush. We had had a hard time getting everybody together. So apologies for the short-staffed episode here. Hopefully this will be a little bit of a quick one. But we really wanted to get this out because Alto was such a big deal for me personally when it came out back in 2014. That seems like a decade ago. 4 years is a decade now.
Absolutely. Time is irrelevant in our new society.
And it's funny, there's we're focusing on 3 games this week, all of which are sequels to games that we covered back in 2014 and 15, so a long while ago. And they are Alto's Odyssey, sequel to Alto's Adventure, which we covered on our episode about Endless Runners, which we kind of did as a genre overview, but we very much specifically focused on Alto's Adventure since it was one of my favorite easily my favorite Endless Runner game of all time. We're also talking about Framed 2. We did a whole episode on the first Framed back in, I guess, late 2014 or early 2015.
And we are also covering Monument Valley 2, which was released last summer. We covered Monument Valley all the way back on episode 11.
11?
When we talked about Apple Design Awards in 2014. So it's a dusty episode. But also probably the most popular game and one we still get requests to cover.
Yeah, well, nobody's going to scroll back on our feed that far. And I mean, I do not blame you. That's, man, episode 11. If I listened to that again today, I'd probably be very embarrassed about the audio quality. Not that we're ever that good, but man, it was rough back then. But, you know, great game.
You can also hear us talk about Threes, though.
Oh,
Threes,
yes.
Which I controversially chose as one of my games of the year.
That doesn't seem controversial, really.
I'm still playing Threes, so hey.
Here, 4 years later, you're still playing Threes. I think that counts for something.
Uh-huh.
So, in terms of longevity, actually, speaking of, Alto is one of the longest-term gaming obsessions I've had in a very long time. And I know this is the short game, and so we're mostly focused on games that take a very short time to complete, right? Alto's Odyssey and its original Alto's Adventure. Alto's Adventure is a short game in the sense that we kind of decided that Endless Runners kind of count as short games because of their short play sessions. We kind of make that exception sometimes. But it is a game that I was obsessed with over an extremely long period of time. When we recorded the episode, I was already deeply obsessed with it, but it's now been years. It's still on my phone. I still play it from time to time. I maxed out every possible option and achievement in the game over the years. And I got a high score that is so high that I think I will never beat it again. Just for bragging purposes, I'll go ahead and say that my Alto's Adventure final high score was 340,843.
Gotta brag there because you don't have the high score on Alto's Odyssey.
I know. I will. I promise you.
You will.
I will.
You'll go back in and edit it in, too.
Oh, I totally will. This episode's going to get like a remaster when I finally beat your score. But Alto's Adventure just... It's a perfect game. It's a game that it's a masterpiece iOS game. It's a wonderful game. And when I got to the point with that game where I had like no worlds left to conquer, right? You know, I wept because I started having a hard time going back to Alto's Adventure because I had done all of the things and I had gotten a high score that was so exciting and that I don't think I was ever going to reach that again. And so it always felt a little less fun to go back to after I'd kind of reached that point with the game. And so I literally tweeted at the developer and said, hey, listen, I will pay you for an entirely new version of this game if you do nothing other than reset the achievements. Like, I don't care. I will play this game again from scratch, even if it's basically the same. And fortunately, though, that's not quite what we've gotten with Alto's Odyssey. It is a nice... it's very similar to the original game, but it's a nice development on the original concepts and kind of gameplay of Alto's Adventure. It has a lot of neat new ideas, and thank God, a whole new set of achievements and a whole new leaderboard for scores that I could start obsessing over, so I don't have to go back and delete my high score out of Alto's Adventure and start again. I can play this new thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of the new mechanics are really satisfying. I love bouncing off the top of hot air balloons. I enjoy wall jumping, although I don't think I've completely mastered all of the tricks to it yet. It is following in the time-honored tradition of give me more of the same and then give me a little more so I don't get tired of it quite as fast.
And that's not always a formula that I think is necessarily like a key to success. For whatever reason, I think it totally is here. And I think, whether that is a key to success for you is really going to depend on how much you truly loved Alto's Adventure. There are definitely games that I've played where I was like, I liked that. And then their sequel, and we might even talk about one of them today, where their sequel essentially was more of the same, but with some new, new ideas scattered through it. And that isn't always what I'm looking for in a sequel, but here it 100% is.
It reminds me a lot about when Tiny Wings 2 came out, and suddenly the new mechanic was basically just racing other birds. And it was the same thing, except you could suddenly see a little dotted line of something else racing you. And that's all they added. It was the exact same game, and I played it for another 30 hours or so. It didn't necessarily change any mechanics. It just gave you an extra incentive to play more. And I think that's what Alto's Odyssey does. There's a couple new mechanics, but I mean, really at the heart of it, you're still using the same controls. You're still flipping way too much if you're me. And you still have all the little satisfying, beautiful, beautiful vistas in the background. It didn't change the heart of the game in any way, shape, or form, which is good.
In a way, I felt like really the best thing that they brought to this new game was new visuals. Just something new to look at. This game now has several biomes, several sort of regions for you to snowboard or sandboard through. It's a little bit more variety than you had in the scenery in the previous game. Not so much that it's distracting, but enough to just bring a little more visual interest to the game. That's a huge plus for me. I wouldn't say I ever got tired of the visuals in Alto's Adventure, but in Odyssey, it's a breath of fresh air. But in addition to that, like you mentioned, things like the balloon bouncing and the wall grinding, skimming thing. All of those are super fun to do, and they just add some more variety. It literally just takes the exact same game mechanics and adds a little bit more variety to it, and that's all I needed to suddenly be obsessed with Alto again.
And, we've covered some sequels completely on their own, given them their own standout episodes. Like, we gave Reigns 2 a whole, 45, 50-minute episode.
Very deservedly so. That game was phenomenal and so different. While it still had a lot in common with the original game, it was so different.
Yeah, and for fans of the Room series, we did one episode with the first 3 games, but that was just because we didn't cover them till the 3rd game was out. Room 3 is so different from the first 2 that had it come out separately, I would have been campaigning for everyone to play more Locked in the Room puzzle games for hours and hours and let me talk about them. But, Altos is just kind of this, I wouldn't say the pinnacle, but it's the 3rd in this little mini series of games we've covered in the past that gave you a lot of the same type of thing. Had a big sequel, had a big splash for some of these, but they each gave one little twist. And Frame takes this to a kind of different level where, to me, it just fixed some of the puzzles I didn't like and gave me more of the puzzles I did like. But if you didn't like the core mechanic of Framed, which is this puzzle game that uses comic panel sequencing, why did you play Frame 2? Frame 2 is just kind of giving you some of the harder puzzles, the cleverer puzzles, and more of those. But I played this right when it came out and was pretty satisfying because it fixed the things that bothered me and made it a much easier to recommend. To me, I would just, if you're interested in the Frame series, just skip 1 and go straight to 2.
Really, I'm surprised to hear you say that, because my kind of take on it, and I wasn't really able to finish Framed 2 before recording. It got a little bit, I got stuck, basically. There were a few puzzles that really kind of stymied me.
It's harder. I think it's harder, too.
In that way, and in a couple of others, it kind of feels like these are 2 halves of one larger game. Like, Framed 1 starts off a lot easier, but these 2 are, visually they're very similar in style. Their puzzles are essentially similar, but the Framed 1 starts you off a lot easier and kind of builds and adds new twists on its mechanics. For example, you get 2/3 of the way or more through Framed 1 before you ever get a puzzle where you have to rearrange the tiles or panels on the fly as the action is happening. And that's like a really cool, that I remember thinking in Framed, like that was the coolest thing that they did, but it worked for me then because it was built on hours. Well, not hours. The game was really only about 2 hours long, but it was built on what seemed like a lot of minutes of teaching you these mechanics and putting you in the right, honestly, just in the right frame of mind. No pun intended. To do this sort of thinking. And then when they did add that on, it was like, oh, that is cool now. And Framed 2 starts you there. And it starts you with that level of difficulty that you had at the end of Framed 1. And it feels very much sort of like a follow-on. Like I could easily see these being one big continuous experience where Framed 1 is essentially a tutorial to roll you into Framed 2. Unfortunately, I played Framed 1 in 2014. And so that tutorial was no longer doing its purpose, and I was dumped into the deep end.
I think that's totally fair. They do feel like one complete game when you stick them together. I think for me, I just liked the mechanics in the second half of the first Framed so much more that by the time I got to Frame 2, I was willing to kind of quickly dive into the more difficult mechanics and see where they lead from there. I think that, kind of like any of the good puzzlers we've played in the past, like, even a Scapegoat 2, it's like going in halfway through if you like those extra mechanics, or going into a Metroidvania and having a lot of the powers. It does lose a little bit of the tutorial aspect and there's less ramp up, but to me, those puzzles were just much more satisfying.
I could totally see that. I found that for me, this game has one sort of thing that its puzzles do, and it's part of just the design of the game. So like it's natural to this style of puzzle game that this works this way, but it's something that always sort of rubs me the wrong way with puzzle games, which is that I don't like well, first of all, I don't particularly like trial and error, and perhaps a smarter person than I could look at this game and instantly figure out a puzzle, or, maybe not instantly, but not have to do as much trial and error as I did. I had to do a lot of trial and error to get through most of these puzzles. And I really don't like getting the way that it takes quite a while for the the action to play out. You're not just putting these frames in this particular order and hit go and the action carries itself out. First of all, when you hit go, it often takes a little while, not a ton of time, but a little while for the characters. We haven't really described how framed works for a few folks who haven't played the first one.
Said a comic puzzle with comic sequencing, but we probably should do more.
Yeah, maybe I'll give you the quick version, which is that Framed is a game that plays out. It's a sort of a spy-themed game. Your kind of main character, I suppose, is usually trying to escape from someplace or run away from or towards someone or something. The story does not particularly matter.
You've been framed for a crime as a spy.
Yes.
Double meaning.
Exactly. And so then each screen is essentially like a comic page. And usually the character will run onto screen and through a comic panel and then into the next comic panel and the next and so on. Each comic panel might have a different thing in it, like a guard who's looking out for you, or different doors that you might run in or out of, or some object that you need to grab. And usually you're going to be rearranging those panels so that, for example, you don't want to enter the room with the guard from the left, you want to come in from the right so that you're not seen, or you want to enter through the green door so that when you exit, you are exiting also through the green door and not through the red door that would kill you. You're rearranging the panels, and specifically here, rearranging them on the fly, because you can have him run into a panel and then move that panel while he's in it, or move panels around it while he's in that panel, to kind of rearrange things on the fly and try and get the flow to move through the game without him getting caught or killed or what have you. Well, anyway, the reason I was trying to explain that was that in this game, if you screw up, you got to start over, and sometimes starting over takes a while. And particularly if you're me, maybe because this is involving so much moving panels on the fly as the action is happening, maybe you're not even sure how things were arranged at the start, or it might take some trial and error just to figure out, oh, something I did worked there, but wait, what was it? It just involved a lot of trial and error, much more for me than with the previous game. Or at least with the earlier levels of the previous game. So I don't know. I found that pretty frustrating, because every time he would get caught and I had to start over, I was like, ugh, where even was I? Where were these panels? I have to rearrange them again. And I got pretty frustrated with it. But it is definitely more dynamic than most of the first game. So if you enjoyed that sort of latter third of the first game, this is a lot more of that.
Yeah, and we've got to mention Gorogoa has a lot of DNA in it to share with Framed, but it's a very different art style and it's a very different type of puzzle, and there's less of the zooming into panels and out of panels. There's none of that in Framed. Framed is just a sequence game.
It's not really a fair comparison to compare this game with Gorogoa, but it certainly doesn't.
Only comparison.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't do Framed a lot of favors to come out. Now, I think it actually came out before Framed 2 came out before Gorogoa, and obviously Framed 1 came out years before Gorogoa. So it's not really a fair comparison to make. But having just played Gorogoa, Framed does sort of suffer by comparison, because we're looking at a game that is expanding on some ideas that were very cool and original in 2014. I remember when I played this the first time, I had never seen anything like it before. And here we are 4+ years later, and Gorogoa has had all 4 of those years to look at Frame's ideas and come up with many new ones of its own and do something that's entirely different. And Framed 2 is going back to that 2014 well of ideas and adding some really clever new ones, but it's ultimately building on that 2014 experience rather than being a totally new one for 2018. It's not really a fair comparison, but I certainly felt it while I was playing this.
And it's something that if you played Gorogoa first and then looked at Framed, you're going to make the comparison. I'd say that it's a more difficult puzzle game in many ways, if that's what you're going for.
So I am the puzzle dunce on this show, and I will own that. Gorogoa was a puzzle game that made me feel smart. Made me now that wasn't entirely because it was easy. It was because the game was very, very smart and was constantly surprising me. It was also easier, but this game did not make me feel smart. Instead, it made me feel slow. It made me feel like I can't quite make... I was always either like frustrated that the guy was running through the panels too quickly for me to figure out what I wanted to do and do it before he ran off the screen, or I felt like I was constantly waiting around for him. It was never the right sort of speed for me. It was
the pace was just off.
The pace was not on my level, which was, I mean, probably me. My pace on these sorts of games is not good, but it was, yeah. Whereas, Gorogoa, much more sort of contemplative, almost sort of religious style experience where you're playing it entirely at your own pace. There is no action for you to catch up with in that game.
My favorite puzzle in Frame 2 is when you are in a time loop and you're constantly moving him back and forth between 3 puzzles and he's moving between different levels. I could play that kind of time twisty sequencing thing for much longer than they gave. They gave me lots of iterations on it and I was here for it. So if trying to catch a dude running off the bottom of one screen as he enters another screen, like, and moving the panels around doesn't sound like fun, maybe this is not your game.
It's definitely a cool game though. Like it's got a lot of ideas that weren't in Framed 1. It's very much more intricate. I definitely recommend it if you liked Framed 1. And it's also like, I mean, this seems like a kind of a weird thing to say, but it's also like $3 where Framed 1 launched at $5. Like, I think it's got a sense of like, this is a game to try to, like, this is, it's launching into a slightly different marketplace than we had on the iPhone or iPad in 2014.
Something else, Framed is kind of getting back in the conversation because it just got announced as a 2-pack with Framed and Framed 2 for the Switch coming out in spring.
Huh. Oh, okay.
So if this interests you and you're like, I'm not sure about iOS, you might want to hold out for the Framed collection, which should be coming in about a month. It just got announced 2 days ago.
I did not know about that. That's actually kind of cool. I've seen a lot of things that are like really solid iOS experiences getting ported over to Switch. I mean, Gorogoa launched on Switch, and I've seen a few other things that have like, oh yeah, I remember that. That game was really good, and now it's going to be on Switch. That's great. I hope that's doing well for their developers. And if you're not somebody who has an iPad, then the Switch might be the best tablet for you to play these kinds of games on. So that's kind of a nice option to give people.
And they're literally releasing it as a single game. So the two halves of a whole makes a little more sense that way.
Yeah.
And we've got one more kind of new mechanic sequel to talk about, and that's Monument Valley 2. When this came out, I pre-ordered it. I think it was the first game you could pre-order on iOS. And I was super excited to play it. And I kind of sat on it for a long time. The new mechanic here is that the whole game is an MC Escher-esque puzzle game where you're kind of going in and out through doors, twisting these incredibly intricate buildings to change the pathways you can get through this kind of architecture. And in this one, you have a daughter. And so not only are you going through and moving things and pulling switches and whatnot, but your daughter follows you around, and sometimes you need to have her stay on a specific platform or move a piece. If you haven't played Monument Valley but have somehow played Hitman Go or Lara Croft Go, it has the same kind of DNA there where you're moving and dropping things as you move around. And I know for me, I downloaded it, played the first couple levels day one, and then I didn't finish it for almost a year. Which surprised me.
It's kind of a funny thing. I had that same kind of feeling about it. I downloaded it also day one, and I played through, most of the first chapter, and I kind of sat it down and was like, oh, that was nice. There's more Monument Valley. I'll go back to that. And I kind of didn't. And it's sort of a weird feeling. Like, I don't know how to explain why some games, like Alto's Odyssey, we'll get a sequel like this where it's like, here's more of the same, and I'm like into it. And sold, and I am going to dive back into that with both feet. And then sometimes there's these games like Monument Valley. I thought I might be willing to play more Monument Valley, but ultimately I was kind of done with Monument Valley after the first Monument Valley. I think it's a brilliant game. Monument Valley 1 is a truly brilliant game that still hasn't been equaled. It's like a really, really unique thing and totally worth playing. And Monument Valley 2 is more of that, and it's really good. I just, for some reason, it's kind of hard to explain. Like, I don't think I really want to. I kind of got a complete experience out of Monument Valley, and I was kind of done with it after that. I don't know where that comes from.
Well, I think that Monument Valley 2 didn't feel as different. It honestly did feel like, I mean, it's much longer. I think not much. It's got 4 more chapters than the original, up to 14. And they've got a couple new mechanics, the core one being this extra person. But to me, the story wasn't necessarily richer, and I think it thought it was deeper than it was, which didn't bother me as much the first time. But the second one, they really felt like they wanted to teach me lessons about motherhood and cooperation. And I kind of wasn't here for that. I play Monument Valley for kind of a meditative experience in many ways. I find it very kind of like the satisfaction you get by playing with a physical puzzle, like a Rubik's Cube or something. And I was a little, not disappointed, but a little let down, I think, by the insistence upon itself. It's still beautiful. It still has everything I loved about the first one, but I think they felt like this was a capital S special game, and I just wanted it to kind of give me more levels to explore. It was in its way a little more than I'd liked it to be.
It's funny, there are certain types of special experiences that are special, and then they're hard to go back to. I think that it's kind of like I don't have a good comparison for it. It's not something where like I feel like going back into that same world really adds anything to that experience. So I think with sequels that you can kind of go several ways. You know, if it's a story-based sequel, then it kind of justifies itself by making you interested in, okay, what happens next, or where are these characters going next, or something like that. Very conventional sequels, and that works. Not every time. Sometimes they're train wrecks, but that's one way to go that will definitely kind of compel you to go into a sequel. And then you can have other sequels where they're essentially just more of the same, but expanding on the ideas of the original game, and that's a much more dicey proposition because, like, I think with a short game, it's even dicier than it is otherwise, because something like Monument Valley, part of the value of that experience was that it didn't wear out its welcome. And I thought downloading Monument Valley 2, well, it was a short game. It didn't wear out its welcome. Any more of Monument Valley 1, and it would have been too much. It was the perfect amount. But here it's been 4 years since that game came out. I think I must be ready for more Monument Valley. Turns out I kind of wasn't.
Well, I think to me, it took too long to get to the new pieces. So I think having just an extra character, maybe I've played a lot of that mechanic before, where there's kind of a dog. Usually I feel bad comparing her daughter to a dog, but usually there's a pet or inanimate object. I mean, we've all played a Zelda game where you have to get the stupid statue back to the front.
Yeah.
Or the thief girl you have to sneak past and she follows you.
Or Eco, or, any number of escort missions in any other game. Yeah.
There's plenty of escort missions around. So it disappointed me when it took several stages before I started seeing new mechanics. Like, there's a part where you have to have sunlight to grow trees. And it starts using kind of elements in a really interesting way, or you can control both characters separately. I wanted that earlier because I think I wouldn't have given up on it quite as... I wouldn't have dismissed it, because what I liked about Monument Valley 1 was the pacing, how it felt like you were getting a little bit of something new each story, and then it ended. I didn't have that growth feeling when I started this. Maybe it's because there's more chapters, but it felt like a slower pace.
I think a lot of it is just because it is a puzzle game. You know, there's something that might be part of the reason that like going back to Alto felt so different from going back to Monument Valley, is that, you know, there's something uniquely satisfying just on a tactile or physical level about playing Alto, even if I'm, you know, particularly at the beginning of Alto's Odyssey is, until it introduces some of its new mechanics by adding some new items, it is essentially identical to the original game, but it's it doesn't have that feeling of retread, because, I mean, Alto is about repeating that action again and again. You know, playing another run of Alto is just what you do in Alto. But when it comes to puzzle games, there's very little in the world that I find more frustrating than having to redo a puzzle that I've already solved. And sure, Monument Valley is, you know, the sequel is an entirely new set of levels and an entirely new set of puzzles. But if it isn't introducing those new concepts immediately, then it can feel like you're, you know, redoing puzzles or types of puzzles that you kind of already mastered and already kind of put in your rear view when you finished Monument Valley 1.
Yeah, I think I love the atmosphere. The sound design is great. It's still got all the elements. I mean, the visuals are a little bit wider ranging in this version. But again, not till you get a little further in. You're still getting it's funny. All I wanted from some games was more of the same. And I think from Monument Valley, I wanted the continued growth of the first one. And it just felt like they were pacing it out much slower than I would have liked. And it made me give up on the game for, you know, I played the first 2 levels day one and I stopped because I thought, great, they've given me more levels. There's no urgency.
And this is a hard problem to solve because, I mean, I did just complain about basically the opposite of this with Framed, right? Like, with Framed, I felt like it didn't take those 2 steps back before it, like, ramps you back in. It was picking up so very much where the previous game left off that I kind of felt stuck very early on. But Monument Valley kind of gave me the opposite. It's such a... I don't know how it really, like, intelligently I don't have a solution to this problem. This is sort of this how do you do a sequel that invites new players in while also being a satisfying experience for your returning players. That's a really hard problem to solve. I don't necessarily know how to solve it. But these 2 games took slightly different approaches, and I don't know, neither one 100% worked for me. Framed, I think, worked a little better for me. But neither of them worked as wonderfully as Odyssey did. Oh my god. Alto's Odyssey is still like front screen on my phone and will be until I beat every one of its achievements.
I think that, I mean, I've also gotten thoroughly addicted to Alto's Odyssey, and to me, it's when I think about the games that I effectively beat on iOS that I'm never going to get a sequel to, they're a little embarrassing, but like Jetpack Joyride, I beat all the achievements multiple times. Like I completely beat that game and ended the game. Like I even got like a stupidly high score on Fruit Ninja. Like I would play these games on the L because I had a really long commute and I had to have games that you could play while you were standing up and commuting and have with one hand. So I played so many of these, you know, and endless runner type games. And when they ended, you had nothing else to do. There's only so many jetpacks you can buy in Jetpack Joyride. Like you're out of jetpacks at some point. And similarly with Alto's Adventure, at some point, you know, you'll open it up occasionally to try to beat a harder achievement, but you're going to run out of achievements. So really for an endless runner, you just need like new things to do in it. Because I would never leave those worlds that I spent so much time in if there was more to do.
Yeah, with Alto's Adventure, it made me a little sad every time I'd open up the game and go to the goals screen and it said, "Congratulations, you've completed all the goals." And like there was nothing left for me to do. I still wanted to play more, but I didn't have any more achievements to get. And it's a weird thing to reach that point with a game. particularly for this show, like I don't play that sort of game like for achievements or whatever. I don't usually really do that, but Alto did, I don't know, change the way I thought about that sort of game. It really did like motivate me to get those achievements.
Well, I feel like in Altos, they're not so much achievements as tasks
Yeah.
to make it. They're little challenges to amuse you while you're trying to go further, because just going further is not going to motivate you forever.
Yeah, it was
variety.
little ways to make your run that doesn't hit your high score still feel like an accomplishment because you did maybe hit one of those little goals.
To me, it's an incentive to take stupid risks. That's what I love about the achievements in Altos. Is like, yeah, can I do a quadruple backflip off a grind without hitting my head?
Let's find out.
Maybe eventually. I still haven't, rock bounced to a wall jump twice in one run. I'm like, I can't even do that intentionally once. Come on, game.
That's true. If you're playing Alto really safely, like theoretically, it is endless. You could just do an entirely endless, incredibly play it safe run where you're very slowly building up score. And in theory, that would be like a very successful way to play. But those additional challenges make you constantly want to try new or slightly more difficult things, and those do give you points. It's a great way to improve your high score. If you can do a run where you get all three of those in one run, that's a lot of extra points to add to whatever your massive total is from your long run. But it's a great structure. I'm glad they didn't change up the structure of the game too much, and everything that they added felt like a totally natural fit into the existing kind of game design. I love that game.
And for posterity, what is your score right now?
Okay, so we should note that we are recording on March 8th, 2018. And my high score in Alto's Odyssey is 135,933.
And mine is 205,515.
Ooh, you wound me, madam. No,
that
seriously.
was actually scored right before I was like waiting for a group conference call to join, and I was like, please, no one call me. Like, I was like, please don't start the call. Please don't start the call. Please don't start the call. Oh, man.
Every time I've ever been interrupted, so when I'm playing this game, I'll often get to a point where I'm like, oh, I'm on such a good run, and I know that now my only enemy is my own mind. Like, I'm going to psych myself out and screw something up. And so
that's when you get a Slack notification.
There's this element where I want to think, okay, I just need to pause the game, go get a drink of water, reset, and come back. And it's like I just started again, right? Now I can do, but that's a trap. At least it is for me. Because
you immediately die.
Every time I stop the game for any reason, then I'm out of my flow. I come back and I immediately wipe out. It's the worst. And you're right about Slack notifications. Like, I have to turn Do Not Disturb on my phone if I'm really getting serious about this, because I'll get a notification and it does one of those little banners that comes down over the top half of the screen. And most of the time that's okay, but sometimes it comes down just at the wrong moment. And, you don't realize that you think you're right side up, you're actually upside down, and you come down and hit your head. That's the worst. So, yeah, tips there. Clear your schedule and turn on Do Not Disturb on your phone.
And maybe don't play during work hours if you're trying for a high score.
No, definitely play during work hours. What do you think these games are for?
Absolutely. Why else have endless runners? Yep.
So, thank you guys for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. We are probably going to be taking a short break while Laura goes world traveling. So hopefully we'll get one episode in while you're traveling the world, Laura. But
hopefully more than one. I'm gone for 5 weeks.
I know you're going for such a long trip. It's insane. Maybe you can mail us back postcards telling us all the hot games you've discovered in Europe.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be just me in Slovenia next to a human chessboard and be like, have we thought about covering chess?
We may end up covering some weird stuff while you're gone. So
please stretch all the boundaries and come back and tell me about all the. I was going to actually mention like a game that actually exists, and I don't want to make fun of it. So I was going to mention the watch you guys finally cover what's What's the Dominatrix cruise ship one? Lady Killer in a Bind.
Lady Killer in a Bind. Yeah, that's the one that
can't cover that one without me.
We definitely cannot cover that with a show of exclusively dudes. This is going to have to be our time to cover like safe bets and I don't know, shooty man shooter games. Yeah.
Hey, please do 5 weeks of shooty man shooter games, because I have no interest in the shooties.
Yes. So hopefully, listeners, you won't mind.
For first person shooters are the shooties.
Yes, indeed.
That's why I don't cover shooties.
But I'm looking forward to hopefully covering some shooties while you're gone. We are. So, listeners, we know that you, as well as we, will be missing Laura while she's away on her honeymoon. But, Laura, I hope you have a wonderful trip, and send us all some photos. Maybe tweet them out from the Short Game account if you ever get an internet connection while you're in the darkest corners of Slovenia.
It's very light there. Well, I am going to a cave, though, so maybe not.
Well, don't tweet from the cave. And listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. I have been Raygan Kelly. You can find me on Twitter at Raygan K. That's RayGanK. Laura, where can they find you?
You can not find me on Twitter for the next 5 weeks at Laura J. Nash. You can probably find me on Instagram. Oh, yeah. And our show can be found on the internet at www.theshortgame.net, where you'll find all of our past episodes, including a searchable show notes page. You'll also find a contact form there, which is a great way to let us know what games you think we ought to cover or what we might have missed. And, of course, you can go to iTunes, or I guess they're called Apple Podcasts these days, and leave us a review. That's a huge help to us. We really appreciate every review that gets left there. We read every single one. We really appreciate it. So if you have a moment, do that. And thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.